Welcome to the video solution for worksheet number 4, which covers sections 3.3 and 3.4 with deal with equations. The instructions say for 1 through 7, solve, check, and list mathematical properties used. So there are 3 parts to this worksheet for at least the first 7 problems. If you only do solve, you can't get full credit on the worksheet itself, and you won't get full credit on any quizzes or exams. When the instructions give you 3 things to do, you need to do all 3 in order to qualify for the full credit. So just keep that in mind, no matter how simple the problem may be, and this first few are rather simple. So we're going to start with the first one. 8x minus 4 equals negative 9. So I want the x's isolated, so I'm going to add 4 to both sides. And that uses the addition property of equations. And now what do I get? I get an 8x. This is a zero pair, negative 4 plus 4. And then negative 9 plus 4 is negative 5. And then we're going to use the multiplication property of equations to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of the coefficient of the variable, which is 8. So the reciprocal is going to be 1/8, and then 1/8 times 8 is x. I'm going to get negative 5/8. And this uses the multiplication property of equations. Now we're going to check, and I know there's not a lot of room on this worksheet. 8 times negative 5 over 8. Minus 4 equals negative 9, and the whole time we're asking ourselves, is that true? So notice that 8 times negative 5/8 is just negative 5 because the 8's cancel to make 1s. So negative 5 minus 4 is negative 9. Maybe on quizzes and exams I want to see the final step. Negative 5 minus 4 is negative 9. Once you get to something actually equaling something, not some expression equaling something, but that thing equaling itself, then you've checked your answer. Now you can leave a quiz or an exam knowing that you 98% sure knowing that you got it right. And we've discussed the little mistakes that can happen along the way in previous videos. So here I'm actually going to move the 2t on number 2 to the other side so that my t variables are positive. And then I'm going to move the 10. So this is 28. Negative t plus 2t is a zero pair. Now I'm going to move the 10 over to the other side. Now I'm going to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of 2, which is the coefficient of our variable t, and that's 1/2. So this is 9 equals t. So which properties did I use? I used the addition property of equations twice. You've seen me in previous videos where I squish it all into one line, but here I didn't leave enough space to really do that. So I could have subtracted 10 here and 10 here and then just saved myself. But I want you to write the addition property every time you use it. So since I used it twice, I have to list it twice as opposed to squeezing it all in one line. And then use the multiplication property of equations. And now I'm going to check, and I'm going to have to check above here somewhere. So 28 minus 2 times 9 equals 10, and we're asking ourselves, is that true? 28 minus 18 equals 10, and 10 equals 10. Check. Okay, so our actual answer are these things as well, and then unboxing our checks so that we know that we've checked. So I'm going to move the work over a little bit over here. We're going to add 9 to both sides because my y is already positive there. Why would I want to move my 3y over here, making it negative, and then risking losing that negative sign somewhere in the translation? Negative 9 plus 9 is a zero pair, so I'm left with 3y on the right hand side, and then I'm going to add 9 to both sides, so I get 9 over here. So this is the addition property of equations. Actually, and then we're going to multiply both sides by 1/3 because 1/3 is the reciprocal of the coefficient of y, which is 3. And this is the multiplication property of equations. And then we get y equals 3, and then we're going to check. 0 equals 3 times 3 minus 9. We're asking ourselves, is that true? Don't stop here. You still haven't shown me that 0 equals 0. Now you've checked it. So over here, now we're actually dealing with a little bit of decimal work. So I'm going to add the 1w, the negative 1.2w to both sides because I want my variables to be positive, and they'll be positive on the right hand side. And I'm going to add this 0.6 to both sides, and I actually barely left enough room for myself to do that here. So notice that the negative 1.2w and the positive 1.2w make a zero pair, which was my goal. 9 plus 0.6 is 9.6. The negative 0.6 and the positive 0.6 make a zero pair, so I'm left with 1.2w. Now I have to divide or multiply by 1 over 1.2w, but this time I'll just show you the division that you're all used to. This used the addition property of equations all in one step this time because I left myself enough room. And this is the multiplication property of equations. And you will have more room for your work on quizzes and exams. So now we have to actually do this work. 1.2 goes into 9.6. You move the decimal over once, you move the decimal over once, and here's your decimal. So 12 times what? Possibly 8. 8 times 2 is 16. 8 times 1 plus 1 is 9, and in fact it is 8. So 8 equals W, or W equals 8. So now we have to actually check it. Negative, let me write the check. Negative 1.2 times 8 plus 9 equals negative 0.6. We've already done, oh, this is interesting. Why did I put a plus? I don't think I meant to. I think that was supposed to be parentheses, but it doesn't look like it, so I'm going to fix it. So now we've already established that 1.2 times 8 is 9.6. So we're going to put this negative 9.6 plus 9, and this whole time we're asking ourselves, are these true equations, true equalities? So negative 9.6 plus 9 is negative 0.6, and if you have to do the decimal work for that, you should. But now I've received a true statement checking my work. So now we're getting down to fractions. So my 1/4 m is positive on the left-hand side, so I'm actually going to move the 1 over. And notice negative 1 and 1 make a zero pair, which is what we're supposed to get. And then we have 1/4 m equals 9. And this was the addition property of equations. And now we're going to use the multiplication property of equations to multiply both sides by the reciprocal of 1/4, which is 4. So our m equals 36. So we're going to check it. 1/4 times 36 minus 1 equals 8. That's it. So this is 9. And then we get 8 equals 8. If you want to keep circling your checks, you can. You don't have to. The one thing I really want to see boxed on the quiz or exam are the actual answers. This check is just extra work. The properties are extra work, so I want to see the answer itself boxed. So over here, we're going to subtract 7 from both sides using the addition property of equations. And then we have 2/3 y equals 14. Now we're going to multiply using the multiplication property of equations both sides by 3/2, because 3/2 is the reciprocal of 2/3, which is the coefficient of our variable. And you really need to make sure that you're multiplying both sides by the same number at all times. Sometimes students, when they start dealing with fractions, they forget, or they're just rushing, and they multiply this side by actually 2/3 because they see it next to y or whatever, or they're just in a hurry. So you need to make sure before you proceed that you have the same number on both sides, and you do. We'll have 3/2 on one side and 3/2 on the other, and that's the number that I multiplied by. If all of a sudden you have 2/3 here, you have to think, okay, 2/3 was my coefficient of y, so I shouldn't have 2/3 on here. I should have the reciprocal of 2/3. So that's what the check will also show you if you multiply it by the wrong term. So 2/3 times 3/2 is our 1, which leaves us with y. And now 2 goes into 2 once, and 2 goes into 7, or I gave you the answer. 2 goes in 14 7 times, and 7 times 3 is 21. So we're going to claim that y equals 21, and we'll check it and see how it goes. 2/3 times 21 plus 7 equals 21, and we're asking ourselves if that's true. Notice that 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 21 7 times, so 2 times 7 is 14, and we're still not done even here because you haven't proved to me that something equals 21. Now you've proven to me that 21 equals 21. So the answer, it's interesting that the checking is also the same numbers as the answer. So we're going to go down to 7. So we've got fractions everywhere now, and we've got this the x with the coefficient of 5/6. So some students who are in a hurry won't realize that they can't use they can't just multiply this term by 6/5 and this term by 6/5. you need to multiply each and every term by the same number to use the multiplication property of equations properly. So if it's too confusing for you to start with the property, then what you should start doing with the multiplication property, what you should start doing is just isolating the variable before you use the multiplication property. So we're going to move 3/10 to the other side, and we're going to create that zero pair on the right hand side because we have positive 3/10 and negative 3/10, and that makes a zero pair, and I'm left with 5/6x. And then I have negative 1/5 and negative 3/10. So the LCM between the denominators is going to be 10. So this is negative 2. Hopefully you can see that it's negative. It's not letting me quite write so much over to that side. So negative 1/5 equals negative 2/10 minus 3/10 equals negative 5/10, which is just negative 1/2. So negative 1/5 minus 3/10 is negative 1/2. Now you can use the multiplication property, and this is the addition property of equations. And now you can use the reciprocal of 5/6, which is 6/5, and that's 6/5. And now x, because 5/6 times 6/5 is 1, so we end up with our 1x, or just x. Now, when you start multiplying both sides by this 6/5, you have to be careful. Now it looks like we want to do 6/5 minus 1/2, but remember we're multiplying both sides, so sometimes you're going to have to add those parentheses, or you need to squish it between the negative 1/2 and the equal sign. So I've confirmed that I've multiplied both sides by 6/5, which is the reciprocal of 5/6. And now I've simplified the right-hand side, and I'm going to simplify the left-hand side. 2 goes into 2 once, 2 goes into 6 3 times. So we have 3 times negative 1, which is negative 3, and then we have 5 times 1 right here, which is 5. So the answer I'm thinking is negative 3/5, and this used the multiplication property. So let's check it. Could be right, could be wrong. Negative 3/5. So the first thing I'm going to want to do, and this is our check, is simplify this stuff here. So 5 goes into 5 once, 5 goes into 5 once, 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 6 2 times. So now we have negative 1/5 equals 3/10. We have this 1 here, and this negative 1 here, which is negative 1. We have 2 times 1, which is 2. So now we're going to have to start manipulating the fractions on the right-hand side. So again, we're saying, does this equal it? So 3/10, and how would I change this so that there's a 10 in the denominator? I'm going to have to multiply both the top and the bottom by 5. And, oh, my check isn't working, so I did make an error somewhere. So we're going to go back, and that's why the check is good, because the check will show you if you've made an error. Now, I could have made an error over here in the check part, or I could have made an error over here. So we're going to pause and see where that error is. So there isn't actually an error here. I just saw 3 minus 5 and I thought 2, and I'm like, oh, 2 doesn't match the 1, but I should have just completed the work. So whenever you think you've made an error, just finish your work and see where it goes. So we're asking ourselves, does that equal negative 2/10? Well, when you simplify negative 2/10, we're going to divide the top and the bottom by 2. 2 divided by 2 is 1, and 10 divided by 2 is 5. So in fact, there was no error. I just didn't finish checking. So before you start to think that you know what the answer is, actually show yourself what the answer is. Okay, so we're going to talk about the costs, the markups, the markup rates, the sales price. And there's this formula in the textbook, S equals C plus RC. S is the selling price, C is the cost, and R is the rate. So here's the thing. When you go to Target and you spend $15 on a DVD or a CD, whatever it is, obviously Target didn't pay Universal Studios or M&M or whoever the $15 that they're charging you. They have to have a markup in order to pay for their employees, in order to pay for the rent, the lighting, the heating, etc. And their profits, of course. So the selling price is always larger than the cost that the store incurred in obtaining the item for you. So that's why we have S, this larger number, equaling this plus this. Now, what's RC? R is the markup rate. In fact, I should put markup rate, and we'll put markup here. So it's the rate, that's the markup part of the rate. So if the cost of a shirt is $34, so we know C is 34, and the markup rate is 45%, and at this stage, I will be okay with you writing 0.45 at this stage in the game. Earlier in the game, when I'm asking you to convert decimal to percent and percent to decimal, it's not going to be okay for you to move the decimal point this way or that way. You have to actually show it by dividing or multiplying by 100. However, it would behoove you, it would serve you right, to go ahead and divide this by 100 and make sure you're moving the decimal the right amount of places, because you might just still be struggling with how many places and which direction, and then you end up getting the final answer wrong because you moved it incorrectly. So just remember that the percentage should look bigger than the decimal equivalent, even though they're the same. So 45 certainly looks bigger than 0.45, so I feel pretty comfortable that this is right. So the markup is this part. The markup equals the markup rate times the cost. So all in this problem, we're not even going to use this whole formula, but we still needed to understand it. We're just going to multiply this by this. So 0.45 times 34 . One thing I want you to be careful of is when you're doing your old-fashioned multiplication, that you don't leave that 2 there and then all of a sudden start adding a 2 when you're dealing with this column. That 2 came from 4 times 5 is 20. I carried over 2. That's 16, 17, 18. 3 times 5 is 15, and I changed that 2 to a 1. Now 3 times 4 is 12, plus 1 is 13. So I have $15.30. So don't just leave it like that. Tell me that the markup equals not $15.30, it's $15.30. So the cost is 34, the markup is this, which means your selling price, which is not required in this problem, but the S price is going to be 34 plus that, which is $49.30. So that's a pretty big markup, 45%, but really in today's world, that's about what it has to be for businesses to make money. So we're going to go down to this next problem, which probably will use the entire formula this time. The first problem was just an introduction. So a video store has a markup rate of 15%, which converted means 0.15. What is the selling price? So we're looking for S is unknown, so we're going to leave it as S. That costs 19. So now we're just going to plug. It's okay that our formula starts off with all variables because we've been given enough information to use it. So S, which is our unknown, which we're leaving at S, equals our cost plus our rate times our cost again. And remember, this part was the markup, so now we're going to have to figure that out. So it looks like it's $2.85, which means the selling price is $21.85. And you can leave it as S equals $21.85 so long as you have this dollar. I will take off a point if you do not have a dollar, because otherwise I'm going to say 21.85 what? Inches, feet, sailboats, who knows, because you haven't told me. This dollar sign is the unit of measurement. So I just put units. So when on your quizzes and exams, if you fail to put units, that's what I mean, is that you haven't told me what these are. So that's the selling price of a DVD that costs $19. So here, if there is no solution, indicate no solution. So some of you did a lot of this problem, and then you just kind of stopped because you weren't sure. So again, you have to go back to reading the instructions. So it says if there's no solution, indicate so that there's no solution. So what does that mean to have no solution? If you receive a false statement, that means there's no solution. So if at the end of this it says that 2 equals -5, well then there's no solution. I need it to say x equals something. So the first thing I'm going to do is use the multiplication property of equations to multiply everything by 7. And the reason I'm going to do that is because I want to get rid of this ugly fraction here, because I've got a lot of stuff over 7 and I don't want to have to break it up all over 7. So I'm going to multiply everything by 7. And you have to be very careful when you do this. So the 7 on this side would cancel. So that's why everything in the numerator just stays the same. But the 7 on this side doesn't have a denominator cancel, so it has to be distributed to both pieces. Because remember, when you're using the multiplication property of equations, you have to use that distribute that multiplying factor to each term. But here we didn't have to distribute it because we had a cancellation happening. So now we just continue with the problem. 10x minus 18 minus 3x. And at this point, I'm going to stop talking about adding as the subtraction as adding the opposite. I'm going to stop, sort of explaining all the steps I had explained in chapters 1 and 2. At this point, you should be able to flow through this type of problem. And here I use the distributive property. Now again, this problem doesn't say list the properties, but if you're on a quiz or an exam and you have a few extra moments and you want to try for some extra credit, and your properties actually are correct and they follow the process and they support your work, I am very lenient about that, giving extra credit. So negative 18 plus 18, that's a 0 pair. So now I want to isolate my variables. I have 21 on this side, so I'm going to subtract 7x, and you can see where this is going. So I have a 0 pair, and then I have 21. Is this true? No, this is false. So since I received a false equation, and we'll actually pause for a moment because I want to write that this was the addition property of equations here. So since this is false, there's no solution, and you just write what I told you to write, no solution. And that was it. So in number 11, you actually have to find the value of the x and then evaluate it. So 9, I'm just going to copy down the problem to give myself more space. And now I'll start applying properties and I'll verbalize them. So I'm going to distribute a -1, or I'm going to add the opposite of each of these terms. So the opposite of positive 6 is negative 6x, and the opposite of positive 5 is negative 5. And now I'm going to start combining like terms and moving things over. I'm going to add 6x to both sides. So I get 9 plus x equals 10 minus 5, which is 5. I'm going to minus 9 from both sides using the addition property of equations. And I get -4. So I'm going to plug that -4 into this. So it's -4 squared minus 3 times -4 minus 4. And now I get 16 minus plus 12 minus 4, so that's 28 minus 4, which is 24. Now, I believe there was an error or two on the worksheets I handed out. So you might have a +1 somewhere here. So if you have a +1, that just means your answer was 25. But I had adjusted this worksheet and then didn't print out the adjusted worksheet. So my answer is 24. So now we're going to continue in this, and it's the same process, only this one is actually a little bit easier than this one. So maybe I should have put that one first and then this one second. I'm going to subtract 2x from both sides using the addition property of equations, which leaves me with 3x equals -9. I'm going to multiply both sides by 1/3, which is the reciprocal of the coefficient of x. Here's the 3. So that leaves me with 1/3 times 3 is 1x, to be more specific. And then -9 divided by 3 is the -3. And how do I know? So if I wanted to do a quick check, I say 5 times -3 is -15 on this side. This is my quick check. 2 times -3 is -6 minus 9. And without going any further in my mind, I know that -6 and -9 make a -15, so I'm pretty sure that x is -3. Notice that these two problems, or even the third one above that we just finished, don't require that we list the mathematical properties or that we check our work. So whenever you do anything extra, that's an opportunity to earn extra credit. So 4 times -3 plus 1 is -12 plus 1, which is -11. So now we're going to keep going with these problems. We've got 13 through 18, solve, check, and list mathematical properties. I'm not sure if the worksheet that had the boo-boos on it actually said that. I think it only said for problem 13 to do that. So I was lenient in the grading of the worksheet. So we're going to go ahead and pause a minute. So now we have some more complicated problems. There's more grouping symbols, so they're going to be longer, more time consuming. The thing to keep in mind when you have multiple grouping symbols, as we do on the left hand side in both of these problems, is that you need to start with the innermost. So I can't combine either of these. There's no like terms within here, and there's also no like terms within here. But we have to distribute or add the opposite because of the subtraction sign. So I'm going to start by just rewriting the very beginning. Now I'm going to add the opposite of each term. So the opposite of positive 3b is negative 3b. I'm going to add the opposite of positive 2, which is negative 2. And now I'm going to add the opposite of 2 times 3b, which is 6b, but it's negative 6b because I want the opposite. 2 times 8 is positive 16, but I want negative 16. So you have to be careful when you're distributing, when you want to call it distribution, and then you take that negative sign and distribute it through, it doesn't become a multiplication problem. Once we start with a subtraction problem, we have to end with a subtraction or an addition problem. And I actually just put negative 2 instead of adding the opposite of 2. So right there, I kind of did what you guys would normally do. And then, again, I ended up with an addition problem, but the addition of negatives as opposed to the subtraction problem that I had right here. So please don't turn subtraction problems into multiplication problems. So now can I combine like terms within these grouping symbols? Sure. 4 and the negative 2 become a 2, and then I'm going to go ahead and change this, adding the negative into a subtraction, just to simplify things, how they look. Now, is there anything I can combine? Sure. 4 plus negative 16 is negative 12, and then I have this minus 6b. So subtract 6b. So I added the opposites to clarify so that you don't lose the subtraction process. And now I'm going to go ahead and turn things back into subtraction because things are simpler and neater here. So I can't combine anything within these grouping symbols. So now I'm going to distribute the negative 2 to both of these terms. So negative 2 times 2 is a negative 4, and negative 2 times negative 3b is a positive 6b. And I can't combine these guys either. So I'm going to add 6b to this side so that this is a 0 pair, and I'm going to add 4 to both sides. So this is a 0 pair. So on this side, all I end up with is 12b. And then I have this to be negative 8. So b equals negative 8 twelfths. And then we're going to simplify that. Divide both the top and the bottom by 4, and we get negative 2/3. So it says solve, check, and list the mathematical properties. So which mathematical properties did I use? And I didn't leave a whole lot of room to list and to check and to do all that other stuff. So actually, I think I want to get rid of this, which means I lose everything. So over here, we just distributed the negative sign, so we can call it the distribution property, but I added the opposite of everything. So if you want to put dist, that's fine. And then over here, from here to here, we just combined like terms. And then from this step to this step, we distributed for sure on the left-hand side. And then we used the addition property of equations. And then we used the multiplication property of equations right here. And I didn't spell it out because at this point we should be able to move more smoothly through equations. But I multiplied both sides by 1 over 12, which is the reciprocal of the coefficient of our variable. And then I just simplify, and you don't have to write simplify. But now we have to check. And there isn't a lot of room to check. So this is where I'm going to do my box now. So our check, and we'll see where we go. We have negative 2 times 4 minus 3 times b, which is negative 2/3. Okay, and then we have the plus 2. And now we're just closing out this side. So it's 4 minus 2 times 3 times negative 2/3, which is our b, plus 8. So now when we have a complicated problem to start with, checking it becomes complicated as well, because now we've got tons of grouping symbols, but let's see how quickly it starts to simplify. Negative 2 times 4 minus, so 3 times negative 2/3 is actually negative 2. That's interesting. 3 goes into 3 once, 3 goes into 3 once, 1 times negative 2, not 1 minus, but 1 times negative 2 is negative 2. Negative 2 plus 2 is just 0. That's interesting. And it's possible that I'm making an error somewhere, but this again is going to be this negative 2 plus 8 is 6. So the right hand, notice how it simplifies rather quickly, and I could have made a mistake. We'll find out. The minus 2 times 6 is minus 12, which means this side is negative 8. Oh, that's looking pretty good on this side. So I have a negative 2 times a 4, and that is negative 8. Bingo, we checked our work. Now, as I said previously, 98% sure that then our answer is b equals negative 2/3. But every once in a while, we'll make a mistake both here, which gives us the wrong answer, and then we'll also make a mistake checking it, which gives us a true statement, thinking then that our answer is correct, and it's actually not. But that's okay. So now we're going to have to do this problem the same way we did this problem. This one is just a tiny bit less complicated because I don't have a subtraction, it's just multiplication. So again, it's 4 times 2 minus the 4 times a y, and this time I'm just going to distribute it. So it's the negative 4y, and the negative 4 times the negative 1 is a positive 4, and then this is 8y plus 36. That's the distribution property. So now we're going to combine like terms, so it's 4, 2 plus 4 is 6 minus 4y, and I might have made a mistake at some point. Negative 4y is right here, positive 4 is right here, the 2 is right here, 4, and then we're going to combine 2 and 4 and we get 6. So I think so far I'm pretty good. One big thing is if you don't do this slowly and go inside out, then some students are going to distribute the 4 to the 2, and then they're going to stop distributing because they're just going to finish this off. So you have to make sure you're doing all of the grouping symbols at one time, which means pairing them up and doing what you can there, and then pairing these up and doing what you can inside there, then distributing the number completely through. So now we can't combine these, we can't combine those, so now we're going to distribute. And what did we do here? We combined like terms and we distributed again. So now I want my variables to be positive, so I'm going to move the 16y over. I'm going to move the 36 over. So the negative 16y and the positive 16y make a 0 pair. The positive 36 and the negative 36 make a 0 pair. 24 minus 36 is negative 12. 8 plus 16y, 8y plus 16y is 24y. We're going to multiply both sides using the multiplication property of equations. Because we want to isolate y, so we get y equals what? We got y equals negative 12 over 24, which actually simplifies to negative 1 over 2. Now way back up here I used the addition property, so I don't want to forget that. So now I have y equals 1/2, I think. So now we're going to check it. 4 times bracket 2 minus 4 times negative 1/2 minus 1 bracket 4 times 2 times negative 1/2 plus 9. Okay, so 4, 2 minus 4 times negative 1/2 minus 1 is negative 3/2. It needs to come more quickly than it might be coming to you right now. 2 times negative 1/2 is negative 1. Negative 1 plus 9 is 8. So on the right hand side I get 32, so I'm hoping I get a 32 somewhere on the left hand side, right? So 2 goes into 2 once. I'm going to simplify this, and 2 goes into 4 twice. So I have 4 times 2 minus, what's 2 times? Not 2 minus negative 3 because there's this parentheses separating them. So 2 times negative 3 is negative 6. So I have 2 minus negative 6, which is 8. And surely enough, I end up with 32 equals 32. Yes, notice that these problems do take longer. They take less time to actually do through than to try to explain it. But they do take longer. That's why I said algebra becomes less about one-step problems and more about multiple-step problems. So I actually started with the hardest problems I could have started with instead of starting with some of the easier ones. So these should flow more quickly. Minus 5b from both sides. Minus 3 from both sides. So what does that mean? 3 minus 3, that's a 0 pair. 5b minus 5b, that's a 0 pair. I bring down the equal sign. What's left? 8b minus 5b is 3b. 4 minus 3 is 1. So b is 1/3. This is the addition property of equations. This is the multiplication property of equations. Why? Because I multiplied by the reciprocal of the coefficient of our variable that we're solving for. So 1/3 times 3 is 1, and 1 times 1/3 is 1/3, and it's positive. So we did the solving, we've done the properties, now we're going to do a check. And we have 8 times 1/3 plus 3 equals maybe 5 times 1/3 plus 4. So we have 8/3, and I'm going to immediately change this to thirds, which is 9/3, and you need to be able to do that quickly in your head sooner rather than later. So 5 times 1/3 is 5/3 plus So in order to make 4 with the denominator as a 3, I have to multiply it by the top and the bottom of this by 3 over 3, and that gets me my 12 thirds. So 8 plus 9 is 17 thirds, and 5 plus 12 is 17 thirds. Isn't that nice? You can walk out of an exam being 98% sure that you got this problem right because you've checked it. Moving on over here, slightly more complicated, we have a little bit of distribution happening. 4 distributed to the 3z is 12z. Now, I want you to be very careful. Oh, that's right. This z was supposed to be an a, so we're going to erase my z. But if I do give you a problem that has z's, and I'm actually going to try to avoid it specifically for this reason, a lot of people write their z's and their 2's exactly the same, and so then you start adding or subtracting the z with a 2 when you didn't intend to. So I'll try to avoid using z's, but if you do see problems with z's in them, maybe put a little line through it so that it doesn't, this is a 2, this is a z, so that's 2z. So that was 12a, and then we have 4, and then we have minus 2, and we're going to combine like terms. Now we're going to move the 2a over here, and we're going to move the 2 over there. So this makes a 0 pair, 2a minus 2a. 2 minus 2 is a 0 pair, so what's left? Negative 3 minus 2 is negative 5. 12a minus 2a is 10a. And now we're going to divide or multiply by the reciprocal on both sides. And now we've got negative 5/10, and I'm immediately going to make it negative 1/2, and that answer looked familiar. So I took some shortcuts there, but what did we do? We distributed, used the addition property of equalities or equations, and then we used the multiplication property of equations. At one point I used the CLT right here as well. So I distributed to get from here to here. From here to here I used CLT, and then I used the addition property of equations. So now we need to check. So we have 2 times negative 1/2 minus 3 equals 4 times 3 times negative 1/2 plus 1 minus 2. This creates a negative 1, and a negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. I hope you can do those 2 steps right now. 2 times negative 1/2 is the negative 1. Negative 1 minus 3 is negative 4. Over here, we'll take it a little more slowly. We have 3 times negative 1/2, which is negative 3/2. But we have to add 1, which is the same thing as adding 2 over 2, because 2 over 2 equals 1. So we're asking ourselves this whole time, is this true? So what is this? This is negative 1/2. And we have negative 4 equals, what's 4 times negative 1/2? It's not minus, it's times because of the parentheses. That's negative 2 minus 2, and sure enough, negative 4 equals negative 4 way down here. So notice how it flows nice and smoothly when you check your work. If you've done the solution part right, if you've slowed yourself down enough to understand what the properties are that you're using, you have to pretend when you're solving equations that there's a magical wizard that you have to ask permission of for every move you make. And the magical wizard is going to say, what allows you to do this? And you have to write it down before you move on. That's what you're going to have to pretend to do. Because you will not receive full credit on quizzes or exams if I state solve, check, and list mathematical properties, and all you do is solve. You're basically guaranteeing yourself about 1/3 of the credit, if you've even solved it correctly. And by checking it, you would know 98% sure if you've solved it correctly or not. So now we're dealing with a little bit of decimals. So we're gonna, this is greater, this is positive over here, the 0.5, and it's bigger than 0.2, so I'm gonna move the 0.2 to the other side. And I'm going to do this in 2 steps. I'm doing decimals. 0.2b minus 0.2b is a 0 pair, so we bring down the 5 and the equal sign. 0.5 minus 0.2 is 0.3b plus 14. Now the b's are positive on the right-hand side, so I'm going to move 14 over. And both times I use the addition property of equations, so I have to write it twice since I've used it twice. So now I get this negative 9 equals 0.3b. You can't stop there. You have to solve for b. I never ask you to solve for 0.3b. I ask you to solve for b, or solve for the variable, and that's what it means to solve an equation, to solve for the actual variable. So I have to divide, and this time because it's decimals, I'll show you the actual division. So I'm going to get b equals something, and this uses the multiplication property of equations. But I need some scratch work here. So I've got 0.3 going into a negative 9. Let's just call it 9, but it's 9 whole, so the 9 whole means there's a decimal on the right of the 9. Immediately place it before you start moving decimals. Now I need to divide by a whole number, so I need to move this over once, which means I need to move this over once and bring up the decimal immediately and fill in the bucket with a 0. So now 3 goes into 9 3 times. You subtract 9, you get a 0. You bring down that other 0. 3 goes into 0 0 times, and then you subtract zeros and you get 0. So your answer is 30. And I'm going to actually move this B down a little bit so that it's a little bit more obvious. 30 equals B. And if you're not good with decimals, you need to practice, because some of you are going to give me 0.3, some of you are going to give me 3.0, some of you might give me 30, some of you might give me 300, depending on which way you're going with the decimals. So how do we check this? 0.2 times 30 plus 5 equals 0.5, and I'm running out of space for this guy over here, plus 14. So now 0.2 times 30, so now we need more scratch work, if you can't see it right off the top of your head. So now I've got 6, but I need 1 decimal place, so I got 1 decimal place, so I do end up with a solid 6. 6 plus 5 equals 11, so we'll see what we get on the right-hand side. Now we need 0.5 of 30, but this is where you can say to yourself, and oh, I think I've made a mistake somewhere. Definitely made a mistake somewhere. I'm not quite sure where. I had an aha moment off camera. I lost my negative sign, which is a common thing to do, but you notice when you go to check, I'm like, wait a minute, this is going to be something that's not 11. So that's where I realized that I made a mistake. So I need to be checking this with a negative 30, so I'm trying to squeeze it in there rather than rewriting the whole thing for you guys. But now this becomes a negative 6 plus 1, and now this is a negative 1, not an 11. Now on this side, I have 0.5 times 30, and what I want you to think in your head is 0.5 is equivalent to a half. So what's half of negative 30? It's negative 15. And now I'm going somewhere that I like. See, I was going to get positive 15 plus 14, which was 29, and 29 doesn't equal 11. So I knew I had gone wrong somewhere. And that's why it's also important to check your work on quizzes or exams, even if I don't ask you to, even if another teacher doesn't ask you to. If you check it, then you can walk out knowing 98% sure that you got it right. But I knew that positive 30 was wrong as soon as I started to check my work. So over here, this last problem, number 18, subtract 2a from both sides. And subtract 8 from this side. Oh, this is going to be one of those easier ones. So this is a 0 pair, 8 minus 8. 2a minus 2a is a 0 pair. 5a minus 2a is 3a. But 8 minus 8 is also the 0 pair, so something interesting happened. So 3a equals 0, we know that a equals 0. Now I use the addition property. I'm just going to put addition prop of equations here. Right, and then this is the multiplication property of equations. And yes, you do have to put it, even though 3a equals 0 means a equals 0, because I actually technically would have multiplied both sides by 1/3, and 0 times 1/3 is still the 0. So we're going to check it. We're going to go 5 times 0 plus 8, and we're asking ourselves, does that equal 2 times 0 plus 8? Well, that's 0 plus 8 equals 0 plus 8. And once you finally get to 8 equals 8, you're like, I'm good. I'm solid. Okay, so I squished in a lot of stuff here. Hopefully you watch it on a big enough screen. I can read it on my smaller tablet screen, so you should be able to read it on your computer screen. If you're trying to read it on your phone, you can pretty much forget that probably. That is the end of this worksheet with 18 problems on it. So when you come to class prepared, when you have watched the video lectures, when you have maybe even read the textbook and you've practiced some problems, you become quicker at these. So I didn't give you a lot of space to leave a lot of room to do all your work, but you certainly needed to have at least tried to do some of it some of the time. So you need to solve it, did that, checked it, did that, and listed the mathematical properties, and that's what all this stuff is, and that's why it's all squished, because I actually did all 3 parts of the problems that we were required to do. So you always want to make sure before you've turned in anything that you've gone back and read the directions and that you have followed the directions. So that's the end of the video solution for worksheet number 4, which covers 3.3 and 3.4, which is all about solving equations. See you in the next video.